All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us here this morning. I'd like to welcome everybody. We're going to just go ahead and begin now, but just wanted to take up a few housekeeping items as we do begin. The webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to all registrants. So if you want to watch it back or want to review anything that we go over today, you will have that opportunity. Also, there's a Q&A panel on the Zoom webinar where you can go ahead and ask questions. We'll go ahead and get to those questions at the end. We will make sure that there is time for those questions to be answered. If the questions require more discovery or are very in depth, we will make sure to follow up with you via maybe an email or a phone call at your choosing. Okay. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started today. Thank you again for joining us. First of all, I'd like to start with just a quick introduction of myself and say hello to everybody. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure to meet, my name is David Mehrwein. I am a solutions consultant here at PlotBox. My role essentially is to help prospective customers fully understand how their current processes and goals can be enhanced and those goals be exceeded using a tool like PlotBox. I've been with the company for a little over 2 years now, but I got my start working at a family-owned and operated funeral home in San Francisco back in 2007, and also spent some years with the San Francisco Archdiocese Catholic Cemeteries, working in family services. So nearly a decade, all in my 20s, of working in and around the death care industry. So a lot of the pains and problems that cemeteries face and have faced for some time are very familiar to me, as I would encounter them regularly while working at Holy Cross. And one of the biggest keys for us when I was working at Holy Cross was unlocking the efficiencies that maybe staff didn't realize could be gained. So we're getting to this a little more deeper here momentarily, but it does set us up for a good start today on our topic, which is in fact cemetery workflow. So I'd like to just begin by going over what we're going to cover today. So as you can see, first off, we're going to address what is a workflow, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. The next thing we'll look at is identifying and refining your cemetery's workflows, some practical steps that you can take in doing so. Step 3 would be how can workflow automation benefit cemeteries? And then looking at number 4 would be creating and automating these workflows through PlotBox. And then lastly, we'll save some time for Q&A there at the end. Okay. We are going to start off with a poll question, however. And this poll question is going to get some feedback from you all. You should be able to see that all on your screen right now. The poll question is, do you currently have a method of automating your workflows through PlotBox? Okay, or excuse me, operating workflows. Number 1 would be yes through PlotBox. Number 2 would be yes through another cemetery management software. Option 3 would be we have specific software for workflow automation, or no, we don't have a way to automate our workflows currently. So I'll leave this question open for about a minute, and we'll get right into what a workflow is as soon as we get the poll answered here by the participants. Okay, great. So leave this open for just another couple seconds here as people answers are trickling. It looks like a lot of people are saying that they don't have. Almost half of the attendees today. There is no current automation of workflow, some through PlotBox, some through another management software, and some even through a separate software. So that's interesting. So I'll go ahead and we'll end the polling there, and I'll share those results so you can see them on screen yourselves, just to kind of see where you stack up against your colleagues and contemporaries there. So it looks like the overwhelming majority, 46%, would be no and having that, and everybody else kind of spread fairly evenly through having them in some form or fashion. So that's great that if you do have them, fantastic. If you don't, this is also a great way that we're going to be able to help you today when it comes to being able to identify workflows and create them for your cemeteries. Fantastic. So like I said, step 1 we're going to talk about today is going to be what is a workflow, essentially. So to put it simply, if you think about a workflow, is essentially can help streamline and automate repeatable processes that are business tasks. Okay. So minimizing room for errors and increasing overall efficiency is the goal of a workflow. So workflows are the way people get work done, and it can be illustrated through a series of steps that need to be completed sequentially, either in a diagram or in a checklist. So you can think of it literally as work flowing, an innovative name there, workflow, from one stage to the next, right? Whether it's through a colleague, through a tool, or through another process. You can execute a full workflow alone, like writing, editing, and publishing a blog post, or it can involve multiple people, like a client or a colleague or another step or task that comes into place. According to James Cowerly and some of his co-authors, workflow management is now a core component of modern enterprise IT infrastructure that automates the execution of critical business processes. And what he's speaking about here essentially is automating the workflow. So sometimes we think about what steps we need to take to get from point A to point B. When we're thinking about our business and we're thinking about those processes that we're undertaking over and over and over again. But this is talking about bringing it into like a digital transformation project, which we'll touch on a little bit later, and making sure that if you do need to automate your workflows in any way, that you have the proper tools in your IT to in fact do that. Okay. Some examples of workflow. So in a cemetery setting, some processes that have workflows might include, for example, a 12-week post-interment check. So that means that burial is completed, has taken place. 12 weeks after, we make sure that we, pack the earth properly, that the sod is growing back together, that there aren't any shifting of the headstone, anything of that nature that might cause the family to come back and say, hey, this is not looking the way that we were anticipating it to look and may need our attention. So you can actually get ahead of that a little bit, with a post-interment check, a site check before a burial, or even confirmation of a purchase by a family. So things of that nature, and even something as simple as a service request from a family. And the possibilities are really and truly endless. So when I first started at Holy Cross, we had a workflow in place for our families that were involved with cremation, or they're doing cremated remains burials. Okay. And what we used to do when I first got there is, as the counselor, you would take a sheet of paper, you'd fill out all the information, you turn it in with your burial information, and the burial supervisor would review it and then enter that information into an Excel spreadsheet and then print that Excel spreadsheet to review it. So if you're able to follow that, yes, it's a very cumbersome process. So what we did was, although it wasn't an automated workflow, we created a shared Google Excel document that the counselors would input the information directly into, and then the burial supervisor would then have the ability to look at that Excel spreadsheet. There was a column for their approval to put their initials once they've approved it and once they've viewed it, and that allowed us to really take out a lot of the steps taken in order for us to get that accomplished, in order for us to know when our cremated remains interments were happening. But also just allowed for a much more efficient and a lot less paperwork, saving some trees there in doing that. So that is an example of a workflow that we took and that we were able to make some changes to and improve. And then following that, we're able to take that and maybe even automate some of that through a software. Okay. So when we're looking at workflow basics, okay, you have the principle of automation is that you're able to select the conditions that are being met and actions to be taken when these conditions are in fact met. So there's a predefined trigger that should decide when the workflow begins. And the sequence is always that the workflow is started by the trigger and then it starts running. So during the workflow run, it will encounter conditions and actions as stated, and these will be executed in the order they are written from top to bottom generally, okay? So the trigger is step one, and that decides when the workflows can be done. It can be a manual trigger, or it can be automatic. So a manual trigger would be something like myself informing my burial supervisor that I have in fact input the information onto the Excel spreadsheet for them to check. An automatic trigger would be, say, for example, if I had a calendar that allowed me to schedule an event, and based upon that event, certain things are generated. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But whether you're putting it in your burial schedule like that in order to have the grave stripped and dug, or even a burial completion generates a work order for a post-interment check, that would be an example of a trigger event, whether that's something that's manually being done or automatically recognized by the system when an event takes place. Okay. Step two would be conditions. Workflows have conditions under the control which the circumstances happen during the workflow run. So it'll run into, if yes, then, if no, then kind of conditions, or even certain milestones and checklist milestones that can be hit that will then influence other actions to be taken as those conditions happen. And then the workflow actions, of course, this is where the bulk of the action and the work happens during the workflow. So this actions decide what parameters the workflow should affect, and essentially what should be done to them. Okay. So now that we know what a workflow is, let's talk a little bit about ways to identify and refine your cemetery's workflow using practical steps. So this will be for workflow identification, workflow creation, and also refining ones once you've created some workflows. So for your cemeteries workflows, identifying and refining them in 7 steps. This is a great practical way to be able to work your way through the steps of creating a workflow and making sure that all the information for the workflow as you move through it makes sense. So step 1 is to name your workflow. I know this seems really, straightforward and really simple, but naming the workflow is something that's easily identifiable. That way everybody knows what exactly that workflow is about, okay? You don't want to name it something that could cause any confusion. You don't want to name it something that could leave any ambiguity in it. You want everybody to kind of know what's going on, increasing that transparency. So name the workflow something simple, to the point, and exactly what it's supposed to be. Step 2 would be to identify the start and end point. So you want to identify what the trigger is and what actions flow through to the end of that workflow, okay? Because the workflow without that just becomes a never-ending loop in conditions that could, in fact, go on forever, literally, unless we have some type of end defined for the workflow. Step 3 would be to identify what's needed to perform the process. So whether that's resources, personnel, whether that's equipment, whether that is time, what types of things are needed in order to perform this process. Those are very important pieces of thinking about it and lead right into step 4, which are tasks. So you want to list any tasks or activities that need to be accomplished in order for your outcome to be what you desire it to be. Okay. So you always want to state these in verb/object format. So approve the request, sign the paperwork. And in being specific, not just sign the paperwork, perhaps sign the interment authorization, sign the assign authority form, sign the, whatever it is, make sure that you're specific when you're identifying those tasks and steps, because it needs to be clearly laid out. Whether it's an automation again, or whether it's something that you're following a workflow, you want to be able to make that easily identifiable to those who are following it. Okay. Excuse me. So step 5 would be to identify the order that the tasks should be completed in. Are there certain tasks that should be completed before others are started? Are there tasks that can be accomplished at the same time? Is the order of steps important? Sometimes in a workflow, it's hypercritical. In other times, it's not. It's just about making sure that we're checking all the boxes and getting all the steps to make sure that the end result is correct. Okay. Step 6, now once you've identified the tasks, we need to know who's performing those tasks, right? Who is going to be involved? What resources are going to be involved? So you want to assign the roles of the persons that are doing the work to the tasks and the activities. And then lastly, you want to review and finalize. So reviewing and finalizing means going back through from the top, making sure everything makes sense, making sure that all the start and end points have been identified. You have everything that's needed, your tasks, the order of operations, and the roles, and all of that. Making sure that that's all appropriately done. And once you've done that, you'll be at a good starting point where you can use a workflow automation tool potentially to create your workflow. Okay. Once that workflow is created, the best way to look at the performance of it is to see the end result and make sure that the result is the desired outcome that you are looking for. The other thing that you can do is you can analyze things like the amount of time taken. You can analyze the ability for the workflow steps to be understood and accomplished by staff in the amounts of time that are required for the workflow to take place and be successful. So in refining the workflow, the best thing to do is to look at the process, make sure it's simple to optimize results. Okay. And you want to make sure that essentially the easier it is to visualize the waste that can be eliminated and efficiencies that can be created once you're using and looking at the workflow itself. Okay. So we've looked at what is a workflow. We've looked at defining and, we've looked at defining workflows. We've looked at reprioritizing workflows. Now we're going to look at how can workflow automation benefit cemeteries. Okay. So workflow automation can really benefit cemeteries in multiple ways. First of all, if you have a successful workflow implementation, you can get a huge return on investment on any digital transformation project that you're doing. So if you're doing a project that involves workflow automation within a software package or something of that nature, your ROI, your return on investment, is really going to go through the roof, because you're going to have fewer redundant processes. You're going to have improved accountability and transparency would be another big benefit. So that means that you know who's doing what and everybody can see that. You have improved strategies for internal communications. If you're able to make your way through a workflow and get it successfully navigate it and have it working for you to the best of its ability, you've now just improved your process, and you can apply those things that you've learned in creating that workflow in other areas of the business as well. Okay. You also probably are enhancing customer communications. Again, if you know your process, you can then explain to your families exactly what's going on. So if a family comes in and says, well, what happens before the burial? What happens in order for you guys to make sure this is successful? You can easily detail to them, and within reason, right, what needs to take place in order for this to be successful and all the steps that you're going to take to accomplish that. So you're enhancing that communication with your families. You're also enhancing productivity, right? So we're not taking 13 steps to do something that should take maybe 3. Right? We're not passing along paper between people. We're not wasting paper. We're not doing things like that. So the smaller carbon footprint is a huge piece of that, right? Less paper, less waste. Also enhancing your strategic planning. So if you can strategically plan and execute workflows, you can carry on that vision and you can carry on that process to undeveloped areas of your cemetery, and being able to identify efficiencies and productivity using the history of, burials, like sales, burials, types of interment places, whether those are niches or crypts or cremation gardens or whatever it is that you're wanting to potentially build in your new developed areas. You can take that strategic planning and strategy and apply those things to that to get your best result. You choose your endpoint. You say, what do we want to accomplish? What are our families wanting? That increased communication. It all feeds into each other. And most importantly, more than anything, at the end of this all, it provides an audit trail. Okay. Everybody has to go through, audits, whether the local, state audits, cemetery and funeral board, whatever it might be. When you're being audited, you have to show a paper trail, right? You have to show how do we do this? But you can also use that for internal use. You can also say, okay, well, these are the steps that we take. So we know if something doesn't go according to plan, we can identify where that maybe didn't go according to plan. And we can identify corrective actions and steps that need to be taken in order to ensure that we're making our way to the best end result possible, especially for the families. And I think that we all are in agreement that at the end of the day is what we're really looking to do, is to improve that experience for our families. And creating and automating workflows is a way to do that. Okay. So within PlotBox specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can create and automate the workflows through here during this part of the webinar. So PlotBox itself does have a work orders module. Okay. So the work orders module essentially is used to generate work orders, assign them to colleagues, and actually you can receive email updates when they are picked up and when they're completed. So the work orders module will allow you to have features like a live dashboard with quick reporting, the ability to record start and due dates and times. You can link plots themselves, contracts, or even memorials. So if your workflow has to do with installing a marker, right? Markers ordered, markers been shipped, markers been received, foundation's been poured, or frame has been put in place, markers been installed. There's your workflow. Now, how can we automate that? How can we say, marker's been received, click here. Now that the marker's received, here's a work order for the grounds guys automatically generated to go ahead and install that frame for the marker, or go ahead and pour that foundation from a monument vendor if they need to be involved for a larger monument, right? You can assign the work orders to colleagues via email or text notifications. You can also allow users to pick up and track work orders themselves. So if I am the ground supervisor, I can actually dictate within the workflow process and within a work order who gets assigned this work. All right. So if it's pulling a shutter for an inscription prior to an entombment, well, then I want my crypt guys, I want my grounds crew that are handling crypts and entombments to do that. So I assign it to that team. Okay. If it's to strip and dig a grave prior to an interment, I want my guys that are handling the backhoe, that are handling the stripping and digging of the grave, to be assigned that work. So you can actually do that directly through the process within PlotBox for generating the work orders and the workflows. But also the mobility of it, right? You can use an iPad and you can actually upload images of work that's been completed, and even before. So if a family emails a photo in of work that needs to be done, we can trigger a workflow that says this request has been put in by a family. The monument is sinking, say for example, and is tilted, and we need to raise and level the monument and spade and trim around the headstone. We can do that. We can generate that workflow in there for that to be done in the system, and that way you're having that piece of it come through, and you're able to organize and schedule your work more efficiently that way. Okay. So when you're actually creating the workflow in PlotBox, you just need to access, there's a workflow configuration screen, which is what we're kind of looking at here. And that's in the settings module. So from here, you can set up a new team. So you can set up the grounds crew and create a workflow specifically for that team or for a specific user, okay? You can actually view the configuration screen here as we're looking at it, and all fields are mandatory currently except for excluded days. So you're going to be required to assign a name, a facility, an event type, the type of work to be done, and whether it's an active workflow or a historic workflow. So you can actually track your historic workflows in here as well, ones that you've turned off, maybe ones that aren't active. So you can track and see how those have all done for you in the past. The assign to type can either be a user or to a team, as I said, and depending upon what you choose, the subsequent drop-down menu will actually show you a list of the teams or a list of the users. One of the biggest pieces of the workflow and making sure that it is in fact appropriately completed would be to give it an appropriate amount of time that needs to be done. So whether that's lead time for the completion of it, so you can actually choose whether that's 1 or 2 days before or after the event has taken place or been completed. So if it's for a burial and we need to strip and dig the grave, that needs to be done at least 1 day prior. So you can assign that to make sure that that's due 1 day prior to the scheduled burial date. So this is just set up and setting up the workflow. Now, once you've actually created the workflow, so once you've configured them and saved them, they will appear in step 4 of your burial booking details. So when you're booking an event on the calendar, whether it's a burial or a cremation, you'll actually be able to see the workflows appear on step 4, okay? From here, you can create the work order, and it's going to automatically carry across the information that you've saved, such as the facility. So if you have multiple cemeteries, the cemetery that this burial is taking place at, the start date is automatically created based upon that workflow lead time that we generated. Okay. The due date is also automatically generated. The team or user is automatically assigned to based upon that workflow, the type of work that needs to be complete, as well as the plot once the booking is saved. It's going to automatically update and generate all of that information for you. So really all you have to do within the system is to click create on the action. Once you click create, that workflow is now begun. Okay, so this is, again, it's a manual trigger that you're creating to have that workflow begin, but it's automating the actual process of the workflow. So you're actually able to see the steps of the workflow, the checklist that needs to be undertaken in order for that workflow to, in fact, be successful. Okay. So after the event has been saved to the calendar, you can actually click on the event itself and you'll be able to see the live status of each individual work order. So you can see here on this example, we're looking at a burial from the 6th of September in 2019. The site check and the prepare grave are work orders 125 and 126 respectively. And the status of those is that they are in fact open. So that way, if you do need to look at the work order for any reason, you can actually click on that number and it'll actually bring you into the work order itself. You can see all of the key information surrounded by it. You can see such as who it's been assigned to, the due dates, the linked items and plots, and also a history of what's been done so far according to the audit for audit purposes, right? So you can actually look at the checklist. You can look at the contact details of who's requested this. You can look at any documentation. So that would be any photographs or anything that needs to be identified within the work order itself for the work to be completed in a successful manner. So being able to view and see the work order in this view just harkens right back to the transparency and productivity that we talked about, right? So I don't have to track down the ground supervisor to find out what's going on with this work order. I can go in, I can click on it, I can see the key information, I can see what steps have been completed in the checklist, and I can give the family a really accurate look at, this is still on schedule to be completed at your due date. The crew is working on it, and we will inform you once this is done. Once that workflow is completed, we'll notify the user that requested it or generated the workflow that it has been completed, that work order specifically. It'll say, work order 125 is complete. You can now notify the family. So that'll be something that happens automatically through the system. Again, increasing that productivity, cutting down on paperwork, cutting down on needing to ask your coworkers questions that could be answered by simply having a transparent view of work orders, which this provides to you here. Okay. So the work order itself will also be updated with changes to the booking. So this is a huge thing, right? So for example, we have gone ahead and we have booked a burial, cremated remains burial for this upcoming Friday, the 6th of December. Family has called to reschedule. someone in the family is ill and they'd like to reschedule for the following week or two. When you update that booking within the calendar, it's going to update your workflow for you. So you don't have to go and remember to change the due dates on the work orders or anything like that. It's actually going to update that information for you. And a link to that event will actually be shown and displayed in the work order. So it'll show the event itself, the due date and time of all that. And if that's changed and updated and saved in the system, that will then actually automatically update that in the system for you as well. So you'll have that ability to track and see that. Okay. For each of the work orders, you can also include a checklist that must be completed in order for the work order to be successful. Okay. That checklist changes with each event type, and checklists can be configured at an admin level in the settings menu. Again, this is increasing transparency. This is process. This is productivity. This is cutting down on paperwork. This is the ability to go ahead and see all the steps that need to be taken in order for this work order to be successful and completed properly and on time. Okay. It takes the guesswork out of it. It really is a fantastic tool, and is a far cry from using paper. So Rookwood General Cemetery in Sydney, Australia, one of our customers, in fact, this is an example of what they used to be the certificate of verification, and all the steps that need to be taken and all the signatures and all of that need to happen in order for this to be a successful completion of the certificate. It's now in their work permit checklist, and this is an actual screenshot of what they're using with their work order permits. So you can see that they're using it, and you can actually see on the screen, which is a huge piece of the audit trail that we talked about earlier, is even though they are little check marks, okay, you can essentially consider it a time and date stamp by the user. So David Mehrwein is logged into the system. I check off that I have in fact completed stage 3. The permit and the invoice has been issued. It's going to read below it after it's crossed off David Mehrwein on Thursday, the 5th of December at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, in your local time, obviously, but it will show that it has been completed by me. So it's essentially me verifying that I've done that work. And there's no way for me to go back and say, I didn't do that, because I'm logged into the system. That's part of the whole user role and notification system within PlotBox. That's very important to making sure that, everybody is accountable. The audit steps are being tracked correctly. And those that have access to certain things are only going to have access to what they need to be doing within the system. Okay. Now, once you've kind of worked your way through the workflow, you can actually, going back into the work orders, you can actually see from the main menu, you can see a list of all the work orders that have been completed. What we're going to be looking at here is you're looking at the ability to track and sort the information as you need to see it. Again, transparency. I know I keep saying that word, I keep throwing it at you, but it's a big piece of being able to communicate effectively within your business, and making sure that everybody knows what's going on at the click of a mouse, can see, okay, here's what's happening. So that way, what's going on in your cemetery, but more importantly, our families feel like, hey, this cemetery really has their stuff together. They know exactly what is going on every step of the way, and they've kept me very informed. One of the cool features with the work orders piece and other reporting pieces like this in PlotBox is the ability to change the columns, right? So I can see pertinent information that's important to me. I may have more columns up than my colleague Ryan does. He may only want to see certain pieces of information about the work order itself. So that's a per user configuration, highly configurable look at the system when it comes to having the ability to look at the automation of your work orders and the workflow. Everybody wants to see what's going on, but not everybody needs to see every detail of that work. So you can edit that within the system and other places within the system as well. I just want to let everybody know we are coming upon the last about handful of slides here. So if you think of any questions, please go ahead and enter them into the Q&A. I'll be happy to address those here as we get towards the end of this discussion here. Okay. Another big piece of workflow automation is being able to see it not just from a work orders module, but being able to see it from a scheduling and resource standpoint as well. So when you create the workflow and automate it, you actually can see within the diary view, within the list view of the schedule, you can quickly see what status workflows are in each event by hovering over them. So you can see that if you're hovering over the icon, it'll show you the work order number, and it'll show you whether it's open, not open, in progress, and it'll show the workflow to cut grass. Green meaning that it is in fact completed, and red being that it's not been started yet. So you have the status symbols there right on the calendar. They give you an easy indication as to what's been started with the workflow and what configuration has been set up by the user, depending upon what conditions and triggers have been put in place for the actions themselves. Okay. Also from the calendar view, right? So if you're looking at it from, you want to see the weekly view, the daily view, or monthly view even, you can actually see based upon the event, you can see the workflows indicators that will show you the status. Again, hovering over them will show you the information for the event. Clicking on the event, again, you can go into and look at the description of each individual work order as it comes through the system and what needs to be undertaken, no pun intended, to go ahead and have that work order completed successfully for the family. Okay. And for business, of course, but at the end of the day, serving the families comes right to the top of our minds. So just in summary of what we've gone over today. So workflows themselves, what are they? They are a business process that is meant to cut down on repeatable process and information and minimize things like paperwork, minimize the cost for confusion, human error, and things like that. You can actually help streamline and automate your repeatable business tasks that minimize errors and increase your overall efficiency. Once these workflows are in place, it's simple to optimize the results. So it becomes easier and easier to visualize where waste can be eliminated and where you can increase your efficiencies. The automation step of a workflow can provide a number of benefits to cemeteries and can certainly make a huge contribution to your return on investment on a project in implementing a digital transformation such as a software enterprise system meant for cemeteries like PlotBox. And automating your workflows through PlotBox really make it simple and increase a huge effect on your efficiency, and will help bring together in one system work orders with your mapping, your deeds, your plots, and requests, increasing that overall communication, which I think is the biggest takeaway. So, for those of you that are using specific workflow softwares, I think it's fantastic that you're doing it, but wouldn't it be incredible if it communicated or even worked right within the system that you're using currently to manage your software, if you are in fact using one. I imagine if you're using a software for workflow automation, that you're probably doing so also for your cemetery. So we're going to look at the Q&A here. So Paul Laterno has asked, are workflows only available for the work orders module? At present, the workflow intention is geared towards work orders. So what you would be able to do then is what we're hoping to do and expand in the future is to bring that workflows to how you operate your cemetery and what steps you need to take to get through the information. So that's a great question, Paul. But for right now, it's really a work orders based module, but it's meant and intended to cut back on a lot of the paperwork process that takes place during that. So thank you very much. And then Eric Barbieri has asked, how do you calculate fees? What are the costs? Yeah, absolutely. So we'd be happy to follow up with you and talk a little bit more about what the fees would be to set something like this up. And this presentation will be emailed to you. As I said at the beginning, we are recording it and we will go ahead and get that sent over to you just as soon as we wrap up here. So we will process it, and then that email, I believe, will be sent out by the end of business tomorrow with that link, and it is available to be shared. Okay. Are there any other questions just before we wrap up here? That's a great question. Yeah. So your work orders, actually, there is some reporting that can be done within the system based upon tasks. It'll show you what tasks are overdue. It'll show you a percentage of what types of tasks are being created. It'll show you what stage the different work orders are in. Denise, thank you for that question. Yeah. So you can actually do all of those things. There is some simple reporting within the work orders module itself to see and report on those tasks. So you can see, oh, wow, this specific task is being requested a lot. And then you can look at those and you can actually export that and look at it in a reporting format where you can see like what sections those are being hit or what locations. So then you can maybe address, for example, in our St. John section, we're getting a lot of service requests for this type of service request. Maybe we need to address something section wide that isn't being looked at. So yeah, you can actually do that and you can use that information to go ahead and make critical business decisions from it. That's a great question, Denise. Thank you. Okay. If there are no other questions for this time, I'm still going to leave the question window open just as I wrap things up here. But I just want to thank everybody for your time today. I understand carving out 40 minutes of your day sometimes can be a little bit difficult to do, but we do appreciate you taking the time to come through, and we do hope you learned something a little bit more about the work orders piece here. So that is my email address, david.mehrwein@plotbox.io, if anybody wants to reach out. Or if you'd like us to reach out to you, feel free to respond yes or no. No harm, no foul if you don't want us to reach out to you. But if you did, we'd be very happy to discuss not just about workflow and work orders, but the ability for us to come and get the information out to you about PlotBox and other ways that we can increase your efficiencies within the cemetery. An anonymous attendee has asked, is there an advantage to the system being cloud over on-premise? Yeah, so PlotBox is a cloud-based software. So things like that come to mind are security, not having to host a system on site. So when you're looking at security, the cloud is actually, even though people seem to be more weary of not being able to host on-premise, the cloud version actually, especially public cloud, something like Microsoft Azure, allows for a higher level of security. It allows for you not to have to maintain on-premise version of a server that you're having to keep information on. In fact, a lot of data breaches and things like that people worry about happen because of in-house inefficiencies and not keeping passwords in protected places and things like that. So there's the people that think that having a server on site is going to protect them more really just isn't the case anymore. Cloud computing is at such a place where especially a company like PlotBox, where we're observing, such high regulation standards of security, we're going to make sure that the cloud version is in fact the eminent version for software nowadays instead of it being an on-premise. Plus, the cloud also allows for continuous updates of information over having an on-premise version where you're likely having to pay for additional upgrades and updates of your software as time goes on. Whereas it being on the cloud, we can continually work on, improve, and develop the software while you're using it. So yeah, so cloud really would be a big advantage over using an on-premise solution at this point in time. Thank you for that question. Okay, I'll go ahead and end the polling on that. Thank you guys for those of you who answered. Again, I just want to thank everybody for attending. We really appreciate you taking some time today. If there are any follow-up questions that weren't addressed today or you didn't get a chance to ask, please feel free to send me an email. And for those of you that asked for us to reach out to you, we'll certainly do so. Again, thank you all very much for your time today, and have a good weekend. Thank you.